Oh my God, what happened? Which hospital?
Billionaire's ex-lover exposes hidden child. Shocking, his fake marriage. The phone rang at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and everything Lexi Merchant thought she'd controlled fell apart in 6 seconds. Ms. Merchant? This is Riverside Medical Center. We have a situation we need to discuss with you regarding a minor. Lexi's hand froze on the stack of scholarship applications on her desk. Her coffee sat cold next to a framed photo of a young girl with curly dark hair and a bright smile. The voice on the other end of the line was professional, calm, which somehow made it worse. I'm sorry. There's a mistake. I don't have any children admitted to your hospital, Lexi said, but her stomach was already dropping. She knew her daughter. She knew exactly where her daughter was supposed to be at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Not in a hospital. A 9-year-old girl named Maya Ashford was brought in 3 days ago with acute appendicitis. She had emergency surgery on Monday morning. The operation was successful, but during intake, when we asked about her emergency contact, she gave us your name. Maya has been very insistent that you're her mother. She's been asking for you since she woke up from anesthesia. The words hit Lexi like a wave. 3 days. Maya had been in a hospital for 3 days, and Lexi was just now finding out about it. Her daughter, brilliant, curious, stubborn Maya, was lying in a hospital bed asking for her. Put her on the phone, Lexi said, her voice shaking. Put my daughter on the phone right now. Ms. Merchant, she's resting, but I need to ask you some important questions. We have her listed as Maya Ashford. Is that correct? And who is her father? We've been trying to locate him, but the name she provided... What did she tell you? Lexi interrupted. She said his name is Victor Ashford. She said he's a billionaire, and he works in Manhattan. Ms. Merchant, we need to verify. Lexi ended the call. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely set the phone down. Around her, the nonprofit office, the space she'd built from nothing, surrounded by photos of scholarship recipients and donation letters, suddenly felt like it was closing in. The walls were covered with pictures of kids she'd helped, their dreams plastered across corkboards, their futures something she'd fought to protect. But she'd failed to protect the most important one. Hi, viewers. Kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Comment below, because I want to know who's joining me for this story. The question was simple, but Lexi wasn't thinking about simple questions anymore. She was thinking about a 9-year-old girl who'd spent 3 days in a hospital and decided to tell doctors the truth. The truth that Lexi had spent 9 years teaching her to keep quiet about. The truth that was supposed to stay buried, locked away, protected from the world and from him. Maya knew, not just suspected, not just wondered, knew. The kind of knowing that came from 9 years of questions that her mother could never quite answer. Questions that led to research. Questions that led to letters written in the middle of the night and hidden under a mattress. Questions that, when a child found herself alone in a hospital bed with doctors asking about her family, had suddenly become too important to keep quiet about. Lexi grabbed her keys. The drive from her Brooklyn office to Riverside Medical Center was 17 minutes on a good day. She made it in 11. The sterile hallway smelled like antiseptic and fear. Everything was too white, too bright, too real. A nurse directed her to the pediatric wing. Room 312. Her hands were still shaking when she pushed open the door. There was. She looked so small in that hospital bed, and 4 ran into her left arm. A hospital gown hung loosely on her thin frame, but her eyes, her dark, intelligent eyes, they went wide when she saw her mother, and something inside Lexi broke completely. "Mommy?" Maya's hand reached out, and Lexi moved to her side immediately, careful of the lines and tubes, and all the evidence of these 3 days she'd missed. She took her daughter's small hand, and that's when she noticed something that made her breath catch. Maya's cheekbones, the sharp angle of them, the way they caught the light. Those weren't from Thalai. Those came from somewhere else. Someone else. Someone whose features Lexi had spent 12 years trying to forget, and 9 years trying to keep her daughter from knowing. "Baby, what happened? Why didn't anyone call me?" Lexi whispered, but even as she asked, she knew. The hospital had called. They'd called the woman named on the emergency contact form. The woman Maya had insisted was her mother. Maya's eyes were serious, more serious than a 9-year-old's eyes should ever be. "The doctors kept asking about my dad," Maya said quietly. "They wanted to call him. They kept asking questions about him, and I didn't have a good answer, because I don't really know him. So I told them the truth. I told them his name. Everything Lexi had built, the careful walls, the explanations, the deflections, the "we'll talk about this when you're older" conversations, all of it shattered in that moment. Because her daughter, lying in a hospital bed after emergency surgery, had decided that protecting a secret was less important than being honest about who she was. And the secret she'd exposed wasn't just about a man Maya had never met. It was about the life Lexi had chosen to hide. The truth she'd buried. The billionaire from Manhattan who had no idea that his daughter had been lying in a hospital bed for 3 days, asking for him, while Lexi sat in her office thinking she had everything under control. What happens next will test everything Lexi believed about protection, truth, and the price of secrets. Because somewhere in Manhattan, Victor Ashford was about to receive a message that would make him question everything he'd built. And he was about to discover exactly what he'd lost. Victor Ashford stood in his corner office on the 68th floor of a Manhattan high-rise, staring at his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows. The man looking back at him was impressive by every measure. Tailored charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Rolex on his wrist. Not the Patek Philippe he usually wore, but still worth more than a car. The kind of hair that didn't move even when he turned his head sharply. The kind of face that closed deals without him saying a word. He was 42 years old, worth $300 million, and completely, utterly hollow inside. The office was all sharp angles and glass. No personal photos, no family pictures, nothing that might suggest Victor Ashford was anything other than a machine designed to accumulate wealth and power. His assistant had been trained to filter his calls. His secretary had been instructed to keep his schedule tight. His wife, Margot, understood the arrangement. She got the money and the lifestyle. He got the freedom and the control. It was a perfect setup for everyone except him. Victor had built Ashford Industries from nothing. Started as a real estate developer in his 20s. Expanded into technology, then finance, then anything that would make more money. Each acquisition was strategic. Each expansion was planned. Each decision was made with the precision of a chess player, thinking 15 moves ahead. Competitors called him ruthless. Business partners called him brilliant. The financial press called him a visionary. None of them knew that at night, alone in his penthouse, Victor sometimes stood in the dark and wondered if any of it meant anything at all. His phone buzzed, then again, then a third time. He ignored it. His secretary would handle whatever was happening. But when the fourth buzz came, he picked it up with irritation. The screen showed messages from an unknown number. "We need to talk. It's important. It's about Maya. Please call me back." Victor's stomach clenched. He didn't know anyone named Maya. He'd never heard that name before. And yet something in his body recognized it as significant. Something in his blood reacted to that single word like an alarm going off in a locked room. He pulled up his contacts. No Maya. He searched his email. Nothing. He sat down slowly in his leather chair and stared at the phone in his hand like it might explode. The next text came through. "It's Lexi. Lexi Merchant. We need to meet. Tomorrow. 3 o'clock. Come alone." The name hit Victor like a physical punch. Lexi? He hadn't heard that name spoken out loud in 12 years. He'd trained himself not to think about it. He'd bought a penthouse instead of a house to avoid passing places that reminded him of her. He'd filled his calendar with meetings and acquisitions and conference calls to keep his brain too occupied to wander backward to a time when everything had felt different. But the name had the power to undo all of that in a single moment. Lexi Merchant, the woman who'd asked him to choose. The woman who'd believed love was more important than ambition. The woman he'd let walk out of his life because he couldn't imagine a future that didn't involve building something massive and impressive and empty. He stared out his window at the Manhattan skyline. Somewhere out there, that woman had sent him a message about someone named Maya, and the way his body was reacting, the way his heart was hammering, the way his hands were shaking, it suggested that whatever this was, it was going to change everything. Victor had built an empire by remaining calm, by compartmentalizing, by treating his personal life like just another deal to be managed. But in that moment, with that phone in his hand, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Fear. Real, visceral, earth-shattering fear. Because some part of him already knew what that message was about. Some part of him had been waiting for this phone call for 12 years, even though he'd convinced himself he didn't want it, even though he'd told himself that Lexi was behind him, that those 3 years had been passion and heat, and ultimately a mistake. He called the number back. "Hello?" Lexi's voice, older than he remembered. more tired, but still unmistakably hers. Still, the only voice that had ever made him want to be someone different. "Lexi," he said, and her name in his mouth felt like a betrayal of everything he'd built. "What is this about?" "We need to meet," she said, "in person, not over the phone. Tell me what's happening. Who is Maya? Why are you—" "Tomorrow," she said quietly. 3 o'clock. Park Slope Coffee on 7th Avenue. Please come alone. And Victor? You need to be prepared for the truth. She hung up. Victor sat in the silence of his office as the sun began to set over Manhattan. He thought about calling her back. He thought about demanding answers. He thought about ignoring the whole thing and pretending he'd never received that message. Instead, he opened his phone and navigated to a folder he hadn't looked at in years. Photos. There. That one. Lexi, standing on a beach at sunset. The wind catching her dark, curly hair, her warm brown eyes looking directly at the camera, at him, with a kind of love that Victor had spent the last 12 years convincing himself he didn't need. He stared at that photo for a long time. Then he closed it, set his phone down, and made his way home to his wife, who had no idea that her carefully constructed marriage was about to be destroyed by a single name. Maya. Lexi sat in her office chair, staring at nothing. The hospital had called back. The administrator wanted to know when she'd be picking up her daughter. Maya's wound was healing well. She'd been cleared for discharge as soon as a parent or guardian came to sign the paperwork. The medical bills were accumulating. They needed to discuss insurance. Lexi she'd be there in the morning. That was 8 hours ago. Now it was 10 p.m., and she still hadn't moved. Her best friend Sophia sat across from her, watching with the kind of patience that only came from 15 years of friendship. "You need to call him," Sophia said. Wasn't the first time she'd said it. "You can't keep doing this." "I don't need to do anything," Lexi replied, but her voice was hollow. "I need to pick up my daughter tomorrow morning and bring her home. Figure out how to explain to her why her father never knew she existed. That's the point. He should know." Lexi looked at her friend. Sophia had been there for everything. She'd held Lexi's hand when Victor had chosen his empire over her. She'd held her hand when Lexi found out she was pregnant. She'd been the one whispering encouragement when Lexi decided to keep the baby and never tell Victor. 9 years? For 9 years, Lexi had made that decision every single day. This was how it had to be. Victor had made it clear what he wanted. He'd chosen success over love, money over family, ambition over anything that might slow him down. And Lexi had respected that choice, even though it meant raising her daughter alone. But now, her 9-year-old had made a choice of her own, and Lexi had to live with the consequences. "I texted him," Lexi said quietly. "I told him we need to meet tomorrow." 3 o'clock. Sophia sat back. "And And he called me back. He sounded shocked. He sounded like he didn't believe it. What did you tell him? Nothing. I told him to come meet me in person. I told him he needed to be prepared for the truth. Lexi put her head in her hands. Sophia, I'm about to blow up a man's life. No, Sophia said firmly. You're about to tell a man the truth. There's a difference. But Lexi didn't feel like there was a difference. She felt like she was about to take the careful, ordered life she'd built, the nonprofit that was making a real difference, the apartment in Brooklyn, the routine with Maya, the community she'd cultivated, and smash it into pieces. Because once Victor knew about Maya, everything would change. He'd have legal rights. He'd have financial resources. He'd have the power to disrupt everything Lexi had built. Or maybe, just maybe, he'd want nothing to do with either of them. That thought was almost worse. Lexi had spent 12 years telling herself that she was protecting Maya. But now, sitting in her dark office with her friend watching her fall apart, she was starting to wonder if she'd really been protecting her daughter, or if she'd been protecting herself. Protecting herself from the pain of seeing Victor choose his career over family again. Protecting herself from the heartbreak of watching her daughter get hurt when he decided being a father was too much work. You should go see her tonight, Sophia said. Go to the hospital. See your daughter. Tell her you're bringing her home tomorrow. Lexi grabbed her keys. The hospital at night was quiet in a way that daytime hospitals could never be. Night shift nurses moved softly through hallways. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Lexi's footsteps echoed as she walked to the pediatric wing. Maya was asleep when Lexi opened the door to room 312. She looked smaller asleep, somehow. More vulnerable. More like the newborn Lexi had held 9 years ago in a different hospital, after a different emergency, when the world had felt like it was full of possibility. Lexi sat in the chair next to the bed and watched her daughter sleep. She thought about all the times she'd had to explain why Maya didn't have a father like other kids. Why there were no photos of him. Why she couldn't just call him up and ask him to come to school events. All the careful lies Lexi had told to protect her daughter from the truth. Tomorrow, all of that ended. Tomorrow, Lexi would meet with Victor. Tomorrow, she would tell him the truth. And tomorrow, she would have to figure out how to exist in a world where her carefully constructed walls were coming down. Maya stirred in her sleep, and Lexi reached out and gently took her daughter's small hand. This was why she'd done it. This hand, this girl, this fierce, curious, brilliant child, who decided that truth was more important than protection. I'm sorry, Lexi whispered. I'm sorry I kept him from you. I'm sorry I made that choice for both of us. Maya didn't wake up, but her fingers curled slightly, holding onto her mother's hand even in sleep. Lexi stayed in that chair all night, watching her daughter, preparing herself for the moment when everything would change. The coffee shop was deliberately anonymous. Park Slope had 1,000 places like it. Exposed brick walls, artisanal drinks, customers with laptops and headphones, pretending to work. No one would recognize Victor Ashford here. No one would snap photos of him for the society pages. It was the kind of place where two people could have a conversation that mattered without the weight of Manhattan's judgment, watching their every move. Lexi was already seated when Victor arrived at 2:55 p.m. She sat in a corner booth with a cup of tea in front of her, untouched. Her hands were folded on the table. Her dark, curly hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She was wearing jeans and a sweater that had probably cost $70, and Victor could see every line of tension in her shoulders. For a moment, he just stood there and looked at her. 12 years. It had been 12 years since he'd seen Lexi Merchant in person. She'd changed. There were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. Her face had more depth, more character, but her eyes were exactly the same. Warm brown, intelligent, kind in a way that made Victor feel ashamed of everything he'd chosen. He walked to the booth and sat down across from her. "Hello," she said softly. "Lexi?" Her name felt foreign on his tongue, but in that strange way where something foreign becomes suddenly necessary. What's this about? Who is Maya? Lexi set down her tea. Her hands were shaking slightly. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Maya is your daughter. She's 9 years old. She has your eyes and your intelligence, and unfortunately your stubbornness. She was hospitalized 3 days ago with acute appendicitis. She had emergency surgery on Monday. The operation was successful. But when the hospital staff admitted her, they asked her questions about her family, about her parents, and she told them the truth. The words didn't make sense. Victor's brain was trying to process them, but they kept sliding around, refusing to stick to reality. A daughter. His daughter, 9 years old. Lexi, I don't understand. When would I? How is this? About 9 years and 9 months ago, Lexi said quietly. After we broke up, about 6 weeks after you'd made your choice very clear, I found out I was pregnant. The room tilted. Victor gripped the edge of the table. You were pregnant? His voice came out, strangled. You were carrying my child, and you never told me. You made it very clear that you didn't want children, Lexi said. And now there was an edge to her voice. You told me you wanted to build an empire. You said family would slow you down. You said you needed to focus on your career. You asked me to choose between the life you wanted and the life I wanted. And when I couldn't make that choice, you walked away. I didn't walk away, Victor said. You gave me an ultimatum. Yes, Lexi said. I asked you to choose me, to choose us. And you chose your company instead. So when I found out I was pregnant, I made a decision. I decided that my daughter deserved a mother who could choose her completely, without resentment, without wondering if she was holding her father back. Victor felt like the world was spinning. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. He could only stare at this woman across from him and try to understand what she was telling him. Why didn't you tell me? He demanded, It wasn't your right to make that decision alone. It was my child. You didn't know her, Lexi said firmly. You still don't. You made it very clear what you wanted, and I respected that. I protected you from the consequences of your choice. You protected me? Victor laughed, but there was no humor in it. Lexi, I lost 9 years of my daughter's life. How is that protecting me? By letting you keep living the life you wanted, Lexi said. By not disrupting your plans. By giving you the freedom to build your empire without the complication of a child you never asked for. Victor put his head in his hands. He thought about the last 12 years. The deals he'd closed. The money he'd made. The marriages he'd entered because they looked good on paper. The loneliness that had never quite gone away, no matter how much success he accumulated. And the whole time, he'd had a daughter. Tell me about her, he said, finally. Tell me everything. So Lexi did? She told him about Maya's intelligence, about her love of science, about her curiosity that started around age 6 and never stopped, about the letters she'd written to Victor that she'd hidden under her mattress, about the research she'd done online, reading about his business ventures and his philanthropy and his marriage to Margot. Victor listened to every word and felt his carefully constructed empire crumbling around him. At the end, Lexi said quietly, "She's asked about you for years. She's created this fantasy version of her father in her head, this brilliant, kind billionaire who's changing the world. She doesn't know about the loneliness. She doesn't know about the emptiness. She just knows that you're her father, and she wants to know you." "I want to meet her," Victor said. The decision was immediate and absolute. "I want to meet my daughter." "Tomorrow," Lexi said. "She'll be discharged from the hospital tomorrow. You can come to her room in the morning, if you want." But even as she said it, Lexi looked terrified, because tomorrow everything would change. Tomorrow, Victor Ashford would meet his daughter, and then nothing in either of their lives would ever be the same. The hospital room looked exactly like Victor remembered hospital rooms looking from his childhood. White walls, beeping machines, that particular smell of antiseptic and fear that couldn't be masked by industrial air fresheners. He'd brought flowers, pink roses, because he'd stood in the hospital gift shop for 10 minutes, trying to figure out what a 9-year-old girl would like, and pink seemed like the safest choice. Now he stood in the doorway, clutching the flowers, and completely terrified. Lexi was already there, sitting in a chair next to the bed. When she saw him, she stood up and excused herself with a look in her eyes that said she was giving them space, but also that she was terrified of what would happen next. And then Victor looked at the girl in the hospital bed. She had his eyes, not just similar eyes. His eyes, the same dark brown that his mother had given him, that had been passed down through generations of Ashfords. The same shape, the same intensity, but everything else was Lexi. The curly hair, the tilt of her head, the way she was studying him, like he was a problem she was trying to solve. "Hi," she said. "You're my dad." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. This 9-year-old girl, lying in a hospital bed, was simply stating the truth of who he was. "Yes," Victor said, and his voice cracked. "I'm Victor. It's very nice to meet you, Maya." "Mommy said you didn't know I existed," Maya said, with the kind of directness that only children possessed. She studied him carefully. "She said she didn't tell you because you were busy with work." Victor didn't know what to say. The truth was complicated. The truth was that he had been busy with work. The truth was that he'd chosen his company over everything else. The truth was that standing in this hospital room, looking at his daughter, he could see with terrible clarity exactly what he'd sacrificed. "Your mom made a choice that she thought was best at the time," Victor said carefully. "I didn't know about you, and I'm sorry for that. If I had known, I would have wanted to be here. I would have wanted to know you. Even though you didn't want kids?" Maya asked. "Mommy said you told her you didn't want to be a father." The question was so honest, so direct, that Victor felt something crack open inside his chest. "That was a long time ago," he said. "I made a lot of decisions when I was younger that I've regretted. Not knowing you is at the top of that list." They talked for hours. Maya told him about school, about her love of science, about how she wanted to be a researcher when she grew up, about the scholarship program her mom ran, and how she was proud of her mother for helping kids. Victor told her about his business, carefully editing out the parts about how he'd sacrificed everything for it. He held her hand while she ate hospital ice cream. He showed her photos on his phone. But underneath the conversation, underneath the words they were exchanging, there was a terrible current running through the room. The knowledge that they'd both lost 9 years. 9 years of birthdays and first days of school and scraped knees and bedtime stories. 9 years of moments that had slipped away because Victor had chosen differently. When Lexi came back to collect him so he could attend to business, she found him sitting by Maya's bedside, watching her sleep, with tears streaming down his face. "I missed everything," he said quietly. "Not yet," Lexi replied. "You're here now. That's what matters." But as Victor left the hospital and walked back to his car, he knew that wasn't true. He hadn't missed some of it. He'd missed all of it. And now, walking through the parking garage of Riverside Medical Center, he had to figure out how to explain to his wife that he had a daughter from 12 years ago and that his entire life was about to blow apart. When he got home, Margot was in the living room, reading a design magazine. She looked up when he entered, and Victor made a decision in that moment that would change everything. He had to tell her the truth. But as he opened his mouth to speak, his phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. He didn't recognize it until he opened it and saw the subject line. It was a photo of his divorce papers, already drawn up, already waiting for his signature, and a message underneath. "I know about the girl. Call my lawyer." His wife knew. Victor's hands were shaking as he pulled into the hospital parking lot at 8 a.m. the next morning. He hadn't slept He'd spent the entire night sitting in his penthouse study while Margot slept upstairs, staring at divorce papers that were already prepared and waiting for him to sign. His wife had hired a lawyer. His wife had known about Maya before he even knew about Maya himself. And now, as the morning sun broke across Manhattan, Victor was about to walk back into that hospital room and face the daughter he'd missed 9 years of mornings with. The hospital corridors felt different in the morning. Busier, more alive. Nurses moved with purpose. Doctors discussed cases in hushed tones. Victor navigated to the pediatric wing and found himself standing outside room 312 with a teddy bear he'd bought at the hospital gift shop and absolutely no idea what he was supposed to do. Lexi opened the door before he could knock. She looked exhausted. Her eyes were red. She was wearing the same clothes as yesterday. She'd spent the night here, he realized. She'd stayed with Maya. "Good morning," she said quietly, stepping back to let him inside. Maya was awake. She was sitting up in bed with a breakfast tray in front of her that she wasn't eating. When she saw Victor, her entire face changed. She looked less like a sick 9-year-old and more like someone who'd been waiting for someone important to arrive. "Hi, Dad," she said, and the words hit Victor like a physical blow. Dad? She'd called him Dad, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like he'd been showing up for 9 years, and they were just continuing a conversation they'd started long ago. "Hi, Maya," Victor said, his voice rough. He held out the teddy bear. "I brought you something." Maya took the bear and examined it seriously. It was brown, with a little blue ribbon around its neck. Nothing special, nothing that cost enough money to impress anyone. But Maya held it like it was the most valuable thing she owned. "What's his name?" she asked. "I don't know. What should we call him?" "Mr. Science," Maya said immediately, "because I want to be a scientist, so my bear should be a scientist, too." Lexi smiled from her chair, and for a moment, Victor could see what his life might have looked like if he'd made different choices. If he'd chosen this woman instead of his company. If he'd stayed and fought for her and the life they could have built together instead of walking away to build an empire. Victor spent the morning with his daughter. The hospital discharged her around noon. Lexi had to sign paperwork. Victor sat next to Maya while she changed out of the hospital gown and into regular clothes, jeans and a purple t-shirt that made her look even smaller than she was. She moved carefully, aware of her incision, but her mind was sharp and curious. "Do you have kids?" she asked, swinging her legs off the hospital bed. "Not until now," Victor said. "So I'm your only kid?" "Yes, you're my only child." Maya processed this information seriously. "That means I'm important to you." "You're the most important person to me," Victor said, and he meant it with a certainty that surprised him. He'd only known this girl for 24 hours, but somehow she'd become more real to him than anything else in his life. "Mom said you're very busy," Maya said. "With work. I am busy," Victor admitted. But I'm going to make time for you. That's a promise. They drove back to Brooklyn in separate cars. Victor followed Lexi's Honda to a brownstone apartment on a tree-lined street in Park Slope. The building was old and charming in a way that his penthouse would never be. There were flowers in window boxes, a stoop with steps worn from use, a neighborhood that felt like actual people lived there instead of just high net worth individuals existing alongside each other. Inside, Lexi's apartment was warm and lived in. Books everywhere, photos of Maya on every wall, furniture that had been collected over time rather than purchased in a single decorator's visit. Victor looked around and thought about his own home, all glass and marble and emptiness. "I'll help her get settled," Lexi said. "She needs to rest for the next few days." "Can the first," Victor started, then stopped. He had no right to ask for anything. He'd given up rights the moment he'd told Lexi he didn't want a family. "I'll come by tomorrow. Is that okay?" "That's okay," Lexi said. But as Victor left the apartment and walked back down to his car, he realized something that made his chest tight with panic. He had a daughter. He had a real, living, breathing daughter who was 9 years old and who'd spent 9 years without him. And now he had to figure out how to be the kind of father she deserved while his wife was upstairs in his penthouse, probably on the phone with her lawyer, probably telling everyone in Manhattan that her husband had a secret child. He drove back to the city in a daze. His office was waiting. His company was waiting. His perfectly ordered life was waiting for him to come back and pretend that everything was normal. But nothing was normal anymore. Nothing would ever be normal again. By the time he got back to his penthouse, Margot had left. Her clothes were gone from the closet. Her jewelry had been removed from the safe. And on his desk was a note, written in her precise handwriting. "I spoke to my lawyer. You'll hear from them today. Don't bother coming back here. I've already moved out. Also, you should know that I found out about your daughter before you did. I've known for 3 days. The fact that you didn't tell me says everything about our marriage. I'll be filing for divorce." Victor sat at his desk and realized that his wife of 18 months was gone, and he felt almost nothing. The marriage had been so empty, so carefully constructed to look perfect from the outside, that its ending barely registered as a loss. What he felt instead was relief, and guilt for feeling that relief, and fear about what came next. He called his lawyer and set up a meeting. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He turned off his phone and drove back to Brooklyn. He sat outside Lexi's apartment for an hour, just watching the building, imagining what his daughter was doing inside, wondering if she was sleeping, wondering if she was thinking about him, wondering how he was supposed to build a relationship with a girl he'd missed 9 years of knowing. When he finally drove home, it was past midnight. The city was quiet. And Victor Ashford, billionaire, master of his empire, felt more lost than he'd ever felt in his life. Because, for the first time, he understood what he'd actually lost. So, here's my question for you. If you had to choose between building an empire and knowing your daughter, what would you choose? Comment below and let me know your thoughts, because this decision is about to become very real for Victor. The private investigator's report landed on Margot Ashford's desk at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday, and the first thing she did was read it 3 times to make sure she understood what she was reading. Her husband had been visiting a hospital in Brooklyn every afternoon for the past 2 weeks. He was sometimes accompanied by a woman with dark, curly hair. The same woman. Over and over. Hospital records showed the patient was a 9-year-old girl named Maya Ashford. The investigator had photos, time stamps, documentation of every visit. A 9-year-old. Margot sat in her lawyer's office and let the implications settle over her like a blanket made of ice. A 9-year-old meant that her husband had fathered a child before they were married, possibly before he'd even met her, which meant that either Victor had been cheating on her before they married, or he'd hidden a relationship from before their marriage. Neither option was acceptable. What are my legal options? She asked her lawyer, Daniel Foster, who'd been managing her interests for the past 3 years. That depends on the circumstances, Daniel said, studying the report. If the child was born before your marriage, Victor's relationship with the mother could be considered part of his past. However, if he's been supporting this child, or the mother, without your knowledge, we might have grounds for financial misconduct. The divorce settlement? Generous, Daniel said. If we can prove that Victor has been hiding assets or maintaining secret relationships, we can argue for increased spousal support and a larger portion of marital property. Margot closed her eyes. Their marriage had never been about love. It had been about compatibility, social standing, mutual benefit. She'd brought her family's old money. Victor had brought his new money and his impressive business credentials. Together, they were a power couple. Separate, they were just 2 people who'd made a calculated decision. But calculated or not, Margot had invested 18 months into being Mrs. Victor Ashford. She'd redecorated the penthouse. She'd planned summer vacations. She'd told everyone that they were discussing starting a family. And now she found out that her husband had a child from a previous relationship that he'd never mentioned to her. The violation of that felt enormous. I want you to prepare divorce papers, Margot said coldly. I want them ready by tomorrow, and I want them to be aggressive. I want to know about every cent he's spent on this woman and this child. I want to know about any communications between them. I want complete transparency about his financial situation. I can have them ready, Daniel said. But Margot, if you go in aggressive, he'll respond in kind. If you want a quick, clean divorce, you might want to consider. I don't want quick and clean, Margot interrupted. I want him to understand that you don't get to humiliate me and walk away without consequences. She left the lawyer's office and went home to the penthouse. She walked through the apartment, their apartment, and felt nothing but contempt. For Victor, for herself, for believing that this arrangement could ever be enough. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She called her mother. Darling, what's wrong? Her mother asked, immediately detecting the tone in her voice. Victor has a daughter, Margot said, bluntly, from before we were married. He's been seeing them without telling me. He lied to me for 18 months. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Well, her mother said finally, I suppose that answers the question of whether your marriage was ever going to work. What do you mean? I mean, my dear, that I've been married twice, and I've learned something important. Man who hides a child from you is a man who doesn't trust you with the important things. If he couldn't tell you about his daughter, what else is he hiding? Margot hadn't thought about it that way. She'd been so focused on the betrayal that she hadn't considered what it meant about Victor's character, or what it meant about their relationship. I'm filing for divorce, Margot said. Good, her mother replied. You deserve someone who chooses you completely, not someone who's only half committed. Go find that person. After she hung up, Margot did something that surprised her. She cried, not because she was losing Victor. She wasn't losing anything valuable. She cried because she realized that she'd spent 18 months in a marriage with someone who would never really choose her, someone who was always going to have one foot out the door, always going to be looking backward at what he'd lost. She called her lawyer back and told him to have the divorce papers prepared for the next day. But she also told him something else. Make sure the terms are fair, she said. I want my settlement, but I don't want to destroy him. He's clearly dealing with something bigger than our marriage. Let's just end this cleanly. That night, Margot packed a bag and left the penthouse. She called a car to take her to her sister's apartment in the West Village. And as she rode through Manhattan, watching the city pass by her window, she realized something. Maybe this was the best thing that could have happened to her. Maybe losing Victor Ashford was actually winning. Comment below. Have you ever realized too late that someone wasn't the right person for you? Let me know what you think about Margot's decision, because she's about to make a choice that changes everything. Victor was in his office when the email came through. Subject line, from Daniel Foster, Esquire. Urgent legal matter. He didn't need to open the attachment to know what it contained. He already knew. Margot had been gone for 3 days. He'd tried calling her twice, and both times her assistant had simply said she was unavailable. The divorce papers were 40 pages long. They outlined everything: division of assets, spousal support, the terms of their separation. Margot was asking for 60% of liquid assets accumulated during their marriage, the Hamptons property, and ongoing support of $2 million per year for the next 10 years. But there was also a note attached, written by hand. Victor, I don't hate you. I'm just done pretending that what we had was real. You deserve to figure out what you actually want instead of performing for the world. I hope you find what you're looking for with your daughter. Margot! Victor read the note 3 times and felt something shift in his chest. It wasn't guilt, exactly. It was clarity. Margot had seen through him. She'd understood that their marriage had been a performance, and she'd had the courage to walk away. Now he had to do the same thing. He left his office at 4 p.m. without telling anyone where he was going. He drove to Margot's lawyer's address and asked to speak with Daniel Foster directly. 20 minutes later, He was sitting across from a man in his 60s with kind eyes and a steady gaze. "I'm not going to fight the divorce," Victor said. "I'll agree to her terms." Daniel looked surprised. "Most men in your position would negotiate. Most men aren't realizing that they've wasted 42 years building the wrong things," Victor said. "Margot deserves what she's asking for. I'll give her more if she wants it. Your wife was generous in her requests," Daniel said carefully. "She could have asked for more." "I know, and that tells me everything I need to know about the kind of person she is. She's a good person. I just wasn't the right person for her." The papers were signed within a week. Victor's lawyer handled the details. The settlement would be substantial, but Victor didn't care. He had $300 million. He could afford to give Margot 60% of the assets accumulated during their marriage. What he couldn't afford, what he'd realized he'd never be able to afford, was another day without understanding what actually mattered. He called Lexi that Friday. "I'm divorcing Margot," he said without preamble. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Victor, you don't have to do that because of Maya," Lexi said quietly. "You don't have to blow up your life. I'm not doing it because of Maya," Victor said. "I'm doing it because I realized that I've been running from the right things and chasing the wrong things for my entire adult life." Margot saw it. She was kind enough to point it out, and generous enough to let me go. "Where are you going to go?" Lexi asked. "I don't know," Victor admitted. "But I'm going to start by being present for my daughter. I'm going to spend the next few months figuring out what it means to be her father. And then I don't know what comes after that." "Come by the apartment tomorrow," Lexi said. "Maya's been asking about you." Victor drove to Brooklyn the next morning, with no plan except to be present. No business meetings, no calls to take, no empire to manage. Just him and his daughter, and the woman who'd spent 9 years protecting both of them from the consequences of his choices. When he knocked on the door, Maya opened it. She was moving better now, her incision healing. She took his hand without hesitation and pulled him inside. "Mom's making dinner," Maya said. "Can you stay?" "Yes," Victor said. "I can stay." And for the first time in 42 years, Victor Ashford put down his phone and stayed present for something that actually mattered. "So here's what I want to know. When was the last time you put down your phone and were completely present for someone you love? Comment below, because this moment, this choice, Victor is making. This is the moment everything changes. 3 months passed. 3 months of afternoons in Brooklyn. 3 months of dinner conversations about science and school and Maya's dreams. 3 months of watching his daughter do homework at the kitchen table while Lexi made pasta and they talked about the nonprofit's work. 3 months of realizing that the life he'd been running from was the life he actually wanted. Victor started by changing his company. His board was shocked when he announced that Ashford Industries would be restructuring its operations to include a dedicated philanthropic division. Instead of treating charity as a tax write-off, they would be actively funding educational programs across the country, with special attention to underserved communities. He redirected $30 million towards STEM education initiatives. He stepped back from day-to-day operations and brought in a new CEO, someone younger, hungrier, someone who actually wanted to build an empire, instead of someone who'd already lost interest in the game. "I finally figured out what I wanted to build," he said in an interview with the Wall Street Journal. And it wasn't just a company. It was a legacy worth leaving. But the bigger change was personal. He rented an apartment in Brooklyn, not far from Lexi. Walking distance. He hired tutors to help Maya with school. He took Fridays off. Not occasionally, but every Friday. He showed up. He stayed present. He became, slowly and imperfectly, a father. One evening, cooking dinner in Lexi's kitchen with Maya perched on a stool, supposedly helping but mostly creating chaos, Lexi watched him with an expression on her face that Victor couldn't quite read. Love, maybe, or hope, or simply the recognition that people could change. "This is nice," Maya said contentedly, licking chocolate off a wooden spoon. "Is this what normal families do?" "This is what our family does," Lexi said, and when she said it, she looked directly at Victor. Their eyes met across the kitchen, and for a moment, neither of them could look away. 12 years of history. 12 years of distance. 12 years of Victor building a wall so high that he thought he'd never be able to climb back down. And now, in this warm, ordinary kitchen, with their daughter laughing between them, that wall was crumbling. "Can we be an official family now?" Maya asked. "Like, can Dad marry Mom so we're all officially together?" Victor felt his heart stop. Lexi's face flushed. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "That's not how it works, sweetheart. Families are more than just a piece of paper." "But wouldn't it be nice?" Maya persisted with the relentless logic of childhood. "I want my friends to know we're a real family." That night, after Maya was in bed, Victor and Lexi sat on the apartment's small stoop. The Brooklyn street was quiet. The evening was warm, and Victor, for the first time since he'd walked away from Lexi 12 years ago, allowed himself to imagine a future that looked different from what he'd been building. "I know I don't deserve a second chance," he said quietly. Lexi didn't respond immediately. She was looking out at the street, watching the last light of day drain from the sky. "You're right," she said finally. "You don't deserve one. But I'm giving you one anyway." "Why?" "Because I've watched you with Maya these past 3 months. I've watched you show up. I've watched you choose her over every meeting and every business deal and every opportunity to climb higher. I've watched you become the man I always thought you could be." She paused, "and because I never stopped loving you, even when I thought I should." Victor reached for her hand. "I love you, Lexi. I spent 12 years trying to convince myself that I didn't. But I do. I always have. I know, she said. I've always known. They sat together as darkness fell over Brooklyn. No promises, no plans, just the understanding that two people who'd lost each other had found their way back. It took another month before Victor was ready. He needed to be sure, not of his feelings, those were clear, but of his commitment, of his ability to show up, not just for a few months, but for the rest of his life. He planned everything carefully, not because he was still that man who controlled every variable, but because he wanted this moment to be perfect. He wanted Lexi to know that he'd thought about this, that he'd chosen this, that he was choosing her. He started small, taking Lexi to dinner, while Maya stayed with Sophia. Conversations that had nothing to do with logistics and everything to do with who they'd become. Reminders of who they'd been, building something new on top of the foundation of what they'd had. And then, one evening in May, he drove Lexi and Maya to the beach. They brought a picnic. They watched the sunset. Maya built sandcastles, while Victor and Lexi walked along the water's edge, letting the waves wash over their feet. And when the sky turned gold and orange, and the light did something almost magical to the water, Victor got down on one knee. He'd bought a simple diamond ring with wildflowers engraved on the band. Not because he was trying to prove anything, not because he was trying to win her back, but because wildflowers had always been her favorite. She'd told him once that they looked more honest than cultivated flowers, more real, more true. "Lexi," he said, and his voice was shaking, "I know I don't deserve a second chance. I know I wasn't the man you needed me to be. But I'm asking you to marry me, not because of obligation or because of Maya or because of the life we could have. I'm asking you to marry me because every day without you felt like a waste of oxygen. Because you're the only person who's ever made me want to be better. Because I love you with every part of my soul." Tears streamed down Lexi's face. She laughed and cried at the same time. "Yes," she said. "Yes, of course, yes." Maya ran down from the beach, where she'd been building sandcastles, squealing with joy when she realized what had happened. "We're getting married? We're a real family now." She jumped between them, and both her parents held her close, and under the stars that seemed brighter than they'd ever been, something precious was found, a second chance at family, at love, at the life that actually mattered. If this story about second chances is hitting you right now, smash that like button and comment below. Tell me, do you believe people can change? Do you think Victor earned his redemption? Let me know what you think, because your comments drive this channel, and I read every single one. The story broke on a Tuesday morning. A journalist from a major publications had been investigating Victor Ashford's recent business changes. The dramatic shift in company direction, the restructuring, the philanthropic focus. When they started digging, they found the connection. The hospital records, the 9-year-old girl, the woman from his past, the broken marriage. The headline was impossible to miss. Billionaire's Secret Life. How Victor Ashford hid a 9-year-old daughter for years. The article was detailed and, thankfully, largely accurate. It reported on Victor's divorce from Margot, his relationship with Lexi, the existence of Maya. It reported on his recent business changes and his new philanthropic focus. It painted a picture of a man who'd been running from love and finally running back toward it. What happened next surprised everyone. Instead of scandal and condemnation, Victor received something unexpected: respect. The story became one of redemption and growth, of a man realizing what truly mattered. Business partners who'd expected him to lose credibility were impressed by his honesty. Shareholders who'd worried about the philanthropic restructuring became advocates for it. Social media exploded with people sharing their own stories of second chances, of realizing too late what they should have prioritized. But for Lexi, the public exposure felt like a violation. She hadn't wanted to be public. She hadn't wanted her nonprofit work to be overshadowed by tabloid coverage of her personal life. She hadn't wanted Maya's privacy invaded. She sat in her office, staring at her computer screen, reading article after article about herself, about Victor, about their daughter, and felt like the walls were closing in. Victor found her there at 3 p.m., tears streaming down her face, scrolling through comments from strangers who suddenly felt like they had permission to have opinions about her life. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "I'm so sorry. I should have protected you better. This was always going to come out," Lexi said quietly. "Once we started being seen together, I wasn't ready." Victor sat down beside her and took her hand. "What do you need? What can I do?" "I don't know," Lexi admitted. "I feel like my life has been turned upside down. A month ago, I was quietly running my nonprofit, living my life, raising my daughter in peace. And now I'm in the tabloids, and everyone knows my business, and I don't know how to handle it." "Then we handle it together," Victor said. "We go public with our truth. We explain what happened, why we made the choices we did, and why we're rebuilding. We control the narrative rather than letting it control us." A week later, they held a press conference. Lexi and Victor sat across from each other in front of cameras, and the world watched as a billionaire and a nonprofit director told the truth about love, choice, and second chances. "I want to be direct," Victor began, addressing the cameras. "I failed to be a father to my daughter for 9 years. That's a fact that nothing can change. What I'm here to tell you is why I'm working to change everything else." He explained the situation, how he and Lexi had separated, how he'd chosen ambition over love, how he'd asked Lexi to choose between a life with him or the life she wanted, how she'd found out she was pregnant after they'd already parted ways, how she'd made the choice to raise Maya alone, never telling him because she'd respected the boundaries he'd set. "It wasn't deception," he said clearly. "It was respect, and I wasn't ready to respect what mattered. I wasn't ready to understand that business success means nothing if you're empty inside." Then Lexi spoke. "I've spent 9 years telling myself I was protecting my daughter," she said, her voice steady but emotional. "Protecting her from disappointment, from a father who'd made it clear he didn't want family. But what I was really protecting was myself. I was afraid of being hurt again. I was afraid of letting someone back into my heart who'd already left. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was stronger. What I've learned is that growth and change are possible, that people can evolve, that sometimes the people we've loved can become even better versions of themselves, and that second chances, real second chances, not just with me, but in life, in business, in how we contribute to the world. Those are things worth fighting for. The press conference went viral, not because it was scandalous, but because it was real. Here was a billionaire admitting failure. Here was a woman acknowledging her own fears and mistakes. Here were two people, not perfect, trying to do better. And in a world that usually dealt in extremes, heroes and villains, winners and losers, their story offered something people desperately needed to see, the possibility of becoming someone different. The comments flooded in, thousands of people sharing their own stories of second chances, of relationships they'd walked away from that they regretted, of dreams they'd sacrificed, of realizations they'd come to too late or just in time. Victor read the comments to Maya while Lexi cooked dinner, and when his daughter looked at him with pride in her eyes and said, "You did good, Dad. You told the truth," Victor realized that this moment, this public admission of failure and commitment to change, this was more valuable than any business deal he'd ever closed, because the world was watching a man choose love over empire. And in doing so, he was giving permission to everyone else to do the same. As they sat down to dinner that night, the three of them, a real family now, Victor raised a glass. "To second chances," he said, "and to the people brave enough to take them." Lexi and Maya clinked their glasses against his, and in that simple moment, everything came full circle. The choice he'd made 12 years ago to walk away. The choice Lexi had made to protect Maya. The choice they'd both made to be honest. And the choice they were making now to build something real. So here's my final question for you. What choice are you running away from? What second chance are you afraid to take? Because if Victor Ashford can transform from a man chasing empire to a man choosing family, then maybe, just maybe, you can transform too. Comment below and let me know what you're going to choose differently. Tell me your story, because your story matters, and your choice matters, and the world is watching to see what you're going to do. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Dynasty of Dollars, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story about redemption, love, and the power of second chances. I'll see you in the next one.